Don't touch my baby. Lorraine's hands froze in midair. The grandson she had prayed for, paid for, and dreamed about was only inches away. Yet she was forbidden from holding him. Tears filled her eyes as her daughter turned away. But neither of them knew that within months, their perfect world would completely collapse. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments and join our growing family by subscribing. Don't touch my baby. Those 4 words hit 62-year-old Lorraine Jackson harder than any insult ever could. Standing in the quiet, soft-lit private maternity suite of Charlotte's most exclusive hospital, the air suddenly felt thin. Lorraine froze, her arms still partially extended, her hands empty. Her daughter, Brianna, stepped directly between her and the bassinet, shielding the sleeping newborn like Lorraine was a stranger off the street. Please leave, Brianna said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a cold, calculated finality that cut straight to the bone. Lorraine stared at her only daughter, then down at the tiny tuft of dark hair visible over the edge of the blanket. This was the grandchild she had spent 9 months praying for. The grandchild whose impending arrival had filled her quiet nights with a renewed sense of purpose. Lorraine's mind raced through the numbers. Not out of greed, but out of sheer, bewildered heartbreak. She had paid the steep out-of-pocket balance for this luxury hospital suite. She had wired the down payment for the sprawling uptown condo Brianna and her husband lived in. She had written the checks for the high-end stroller, the organic nursery furniture, and the lavish, flower-draped baby shower that looked more like a royal gala than a family gathering. For the last decade, Lorraine had willingly, almost eagerly, funded every major milestone, every safety net, and every luxury in her daughter's adult life. Yet, she wasn't allowed to hold her own grandson. Before Lorraine could find her voice, Brianna's husband, Marcus Carter, stepped up from the window seat. He adjusted the collar of his designer sweater, his expression smooth, detached, and entirely devoid of warmth. He delivered the line that changed everything. We're trying to create a certain standard for our son, Miss Lorraine. We don't want too many outside influences right now. We need him surrounded by a specific energy. Outside influences. The words tasted like ash. Lorraine looked at Marcus, then back to Brianna, waiting for her daughter to correct him, to remind him who had built the very foundation they were standing on. But Brianna just looked away, crossing her arms, her silence a ringing endorsement of her husband's cruelty. Lorraine didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply gathered her designer handbag, a gift she had bought for herself to celebrate 40 years of hard labor, and walked out of the room. Her heels clicked softly against the polished hospital floors, a lonely rhythm echoing in the corridor. Tears blurred her vision, heavy and hot, spilling down her cheeks before she even reached the elevator. But by the time the elevator doors slid open in the parking garage, the tears stopped. The deep, familiar resilience that had defined her entire life took over. If they wanted a life entirely free of her influence, if they believed they had outgrown the woman who gave them their start, then they could pay for the privilege. Lorraine Jackson was a widowed black woman who knew exactly what it meant to build something from absolute zero. When her husband passed away 30 years ago, leaving her with a toddler's-aged Brianna and a mountain of medical debt, Lorraine didn't break. She worked 12-hour shifts as a registered nurse, coming home with swollen feet and aching hands, only to stay up until dawn studying business management and tax codes. She sacrificed her youth, her dating life, her vacations, and her own peace of mind to launch Jackson Healthcare Staffing. She started it in a cramped corner of her bedroom with a single rented computer and a dial-up internet connection. Through sheer grit, faith, and an uncompromising work ethic, she grew that tiny operation into one of the most successful black-owned healthcare staffing firms. in North Carolina. She had done it all for Brianna. She wanted her daughter to know a life completely free from the suffocating anxiety of generational poverty. Every luxury Brianna enjoyed, the elite private schooling, the summers in Martha's Vineyard, the premium car insurance, the custom wedding gown, was bought with the literal sweat of Lorraine's brow. Lorraine had always believed she was giving her daughter a head start. She thought she was building a bridge so Brianna could walk effortlessly into the highest echelons of society. What Lorraine never realized, until this very afternoon in the hospital, was that she wasn't funding a legacy. She was funding a beautiful, hollow illusion. And it was time to turn off the lights. To the rest of the world, Brianna and Marcus Carter were living the ultimate modern fairy tale. A quick scroll through their joint social media profiles revealed a masterclass in aspirational lifestyle curation. Their aesthetic was flawless. Minimalist luxury, neutral tones, high-ceilinged penthouse views, and impeccably coordinated designer outfits. They were digital royalty to their hundreds of thousands of followers. Every post was accompanied by captions preaching about alignment, manifestation, and generational wealth. They spent their weekends at exclusive rooftop lounges, took spontaneous trips to five-star resorts in Anguilla, and dined at restaurants where the menus didn't feature prices. Online, they looked entirely untouchable. Offline, they were drowning in a sea of their own making. The architect of this grand illusion was Marcus. Coming from a background of modest means but harboring an insatiable appetite for high status, Marcus was obsessed with perception. To him, an expensive watch wasn't just a timepiece. It was a weapon used to demand respect. A luxury vehicle wasn't just transportation. It was proof of superiority. He constantly pressured Brianna to maintain the facade, pushing her to shoot content even when she was exhausted, and demanding they buy things they couldn't afford just to keep up with an arbitrary digital standard. Every post has to look richer, Marcus would insist, pacing the floor of their uptown condo while reviewing their analytics. Every event we host has to look bigger than the last one. People don't follow ordinary. They follow luxury. We have to look like money to make money. But the observant eyes among their audience were already beginning to notice the subtle, fracturing red flags long before Lorraine did. In the comments sections of their highly produced videos, people began pointing out the strain in Brianna's smile. They noticed how Marcus always seemed to control the narrative, how he subtly belittled her achievements while magnifying his own vague titles as a brand architect and wealth consultant. Behind closed doors, Marcus's controlling nature was suffocating. He systematically began to chip away at Brianna's support system. Starting with her family, he scoffed at the traditional Sunday dinners Lorraine used to host, labeling them as outdated and low vibe. Your mother is trapped in a worker's mindset, Brianna, Marcus would say, his voice smooth but venomous. She thinks about hourly wages and physical labor. We are building an enterprise. Successful people have to separate themselves from ordinary people if they want to maintain their elevation. She doesn't understand the level we're operating on. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Brianna began to adopt his toxic lexicon. She stopped returning her mother's phone calls promptly. She started missing family birthdays, claiming she was too busy with brand activations. She allowed Marcus to convince her that her mother's wealth was merely an asset to be utilized, not a sacrifice to be respected. When Lorraine had arrived at the hospital, hoping to share in the raw, uncurated joy of childbirth, she had walked right into the trap Marcus had spent years setting. Brianna had been so thoroughly conditioned to protect the brand of her new family that she viewed her own mother, the very woman who made their lifestyle possible, as a threat to the polished, elite image they were projecting to the world. They wanted the crown, but they despised the person who bought the gold. The following Monday morning, Lorraine sat in her executive office at Jackson Healthcare Staffing. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the city below. She called in her corporate accountant and her personal attorney. There was no grand speech, no tears, and no dramatic flair. Effective immediately, Lorraine said evenly. I want all secondary authorized users removed from my corporate and personal lines of credit. Cancel the black cards issued to Brianna Carter. Suspend the monthly electronic fund transfers to her account. And I want a full audit of the Uptown condo lease agreement. The transition was handled with surgical, silent precision. Lorraine didn't send a warning text. She didn't post a cryptic message on social media. She simply closed the vault. At first, Brianna assumed it was a technical glitch. She was at a high-end baby boutique in South Park Mall. Her cart filled with imported organic cotton onesies and designer nursery decor. When the cashier slid her card, the machine emitted a sharp, aggressive beep. Declined, the cashier said politely. Brianna smiled nervously, pulling out her second card. The corporate card tied to her mother's firm. Try this one. There must be an issue with our bank's server today. Another sharp beep. Declined. Panic. Cold and sharp. Pool vortex ed in Brianna's stomach. She had to leave the items behind. Walking out of the boutique with her head down, feeling the imaginary burning stares of the sales associates on her back. When she called the bank, the customer service representative delivered the devastating news. The primary account holder had revoked her access. Within 48 hours, the true chaos began. The automated monthly transfer of $15,000 that Lorraine provided for living expenses failed to deposit. The luxury condos leasing office sent an urgent email notifying them that the corporate guarantee on their rent had been rescinded, and the current month's rent was 5 days overdue. The lifestyle they had built was a house of cards, and the wind had just picked up. Marcus's composure completely shattered. The polished, calm influencer persona he wore online vanished, replaced by a volatile, angry man trapped in a corner. What do you mean she cut the cards? Marcus shouted, slamming his laptop shut in their kitchen. Call her, Brianna, now. Tell her she's hurting her own grandson. Tell her this is toxic behavior. Quote, I've tried calling her, Brianna cried, her voice trembling as she held her crying baby. She's not answering my calls. Marcus, the car payment is due tomorrow. The insurance is connected to her corporate policy. What are we going to do? Quote, instead of comforting his wife or offering a solution, Marcus turned his rage on her. This is your fault. You can't even manage your own mother. Do you know what this does to my meetings this week? I have clients expecting me to show up in a certain vehicle. We have an image to maintain. Brianna, without that money, we look like frauds. Quote, for the first time, looking at her husband's contorted, furious face, Brianna saw past the designer clothes and the high-vibe vocabulary. She saw the absolute desperation of a man who didn't care about his family's security. Only the luxury illusion he used to feed his ego. 2 weeks into the financial freeze, Lorraine sat across from her longtime estate attorney, Arthur Vance, in a quiet, wood-paneled conference room. The atmosphere inside the office was incredibly heavy. Arthur looked exceptionally grave, his brow furrowed as his fingers tapped rhythmically against a thick, cream-colored manila folder resting directly beneath his palms. He had been Lorraine's trusted legal counsel for over 25 years, guiding her through corporate expansions, tax audits, and personal milestones. But today he looked like a man delivering devastating news. Lorraine, I truly wish I didn't have to show you the contents of this file, Arthur said softly, his voice carrying a deep, somber resonance. He sighed heavily before sliding the dense stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table. But when you asked for a full, comprehensive audit of your personal guarantees and corporate credit lines, our forensic accountant flagged some highly irregular, deeply troubling activity originating directly from Marcus Carter's various shell business entities. Lorraine adjusted her designer reading glasses and began to meticulously scan the pages. The room was deathly quiet, save for the crisp, rhythmic sound of paper turning. As her eyes moved down the balance sheets, loan applications, and corporate registries, a sickening wave of realization washed over her. Marcus hadn't just been living off the generous monthly allowances and safety nets that Lorraine had willingly provided for her daughter. He had been actively, systematically, and criminally exploiting Lorraine's pristine name, her flawless credit rating, and her 40-year professional reputation, using digital copies of Jackson Healthcare Staffing's internal financial statements, documents that Brianna had easily accessed under the false guise of wanting to learn the family business. Marcus had forged corporate resolutions. He had listed Lorraine's multi-million-dollar healthcare firm as a primary guarantor on massive, high-interest commercial loans to fund his own failed, speculative luxury real estate investment syndicates. Furthermore, he had drastically exaggerated his personal assets by completely misrepresenting his ownership stake in Lorraine's private lakeside property, boldly claiming on bank paperwork that it was an asset he fully owned and managed. He had moved hundreds of thousands of dollars through a complex web of questionable business entities, using Lorraine's hard-earned empire as a financial shield to secure predatory lines of credit that he had already completely maxed out. The private jets, the high-end watches, the bespoke designer wardrobe, none of it was actually paid for by high-paying digital influencer sponsorships or his mythical brand consulting work. It was all built entirely on a foundation of systemic bank fraud, crippling debt, and unauthorized access to Lorraine's life's work. Lorraine slowly leaned back in her leather chair, closing her eyes as she tried to process the sheer scale of the deception. The betrayal ran far deeper than she ever thought possible. She didn't care about the lost money itself. Money could always be remade, and her brilliant legal team would easily insulate her core corporation from the fraudulent loans. What broke her heart into 1,000 pieces was the realization that Marcus had spent years systematically turning Brianna against her, villainizing her as a toxic outside influence, all while secretly pickpocketing her life's work from the dark. He had engineered a psychological wall between mother and daughter specifically so Lorraine wouldn't get close enough to see the fraud. Armed with this undeniable evidence, Lorraine made her next move completely through official legal channels. She didn't call an emotional family meeting, and she didn't send an angry text message. Instead, her legal team filed immediate cease and desist orders, freezing every single fraudulent account and formally notifying the lending institutions of the identity theft and corporate forgery. The walls were officially closing in on the Carter household. When the major banks realized that the multi-millionaire Lorraine Jackson was not backing Marcus's massive debts, they panicked. They called in the notes immediately, demanding full repayment within days. The beautiful, fragile digital illusion was dead. The creditors were officially at the gates, and Marcus's carefully constructed world of artificial status was about to completely implode in the most public way imagined. The room was deathly quiet, save for the crisp, rhythmic sound of paper turning. As her eyes moved down the balance sheets, loan applications, and corporate registries, a sickening wave of realization washed over her. Marcus hadn't just been living off the generous monthly allowances and safety nets that Lorraine had willingly provided for her daughter. He had been actively, systematically, and criminally exploiting Lorraine's pristine name, her flawless credit rating, and her 40-year professional reputation. Using digital copies of Jackson Healthcare Staffing's internal financial statements, documents that Brianna had easily accessed under the false guise of wanting to learn the family business, Marcus had forged corporate resolutions. He had listed Lorraine's multi-million-dollar healthcare firm as a primary guarantor, leaving Brianna to face a reality she was entirely unprepared for. The collapse was swift, public, and absolute. Within a matter of weeks, Marcus's wealthy business partners pulled out of their ventures, absolutely terrified of being linked to a widening federal bank fraud investigation. The luxury condo management quickly filed for immediate eviction due to non-payment. Their joint social media channels, once filled with envious praise from strangers, turned into digital crime scenes as angry creditors and former associates exposed their massive debts in the comment sections. The thousands of followers vanished overnight, proving that digital loyalty is as fleeting as a summer shadow. When the financial pressure reached its absolute peak, Marcus did what cowards do best. He ran away. One chaotic morning, Brianna woke up to an empty closet and a cold text message stating he needed space to protect his creative energy. He left her completely alone with a 3-month-old baby, an official eviction notice, and a mountain of legal debt she couldn't comprehend. A week later, a small, rented moving truck pulled up to Lorraine's modest, beautiful lakeside home. Brianna stepped out of the vehicle. There were no designer sunglasses to hide her face today. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She wore an oversized, faded sweatshirt, and her face was completely bare of makeup. She looked exhausted, broken, and stripped of all pretense. In her arms, she tightly held her sleeping son. When Lorraine opened the front door, the silence between mother and daughter lasted for what felt like an eternity. The lake breeze rustled the trees, the only sound in the quiet morning air. Brianna's lips trembled. She looked at her mother, the woman she had banned from a hospital room, the woman she had labeled an ordinary influence. The emotional dam broke. Tears streamed down her face, and her shoulders shook with heavy, ragged sobs. "I chose the wrong person, Mom," Brianna whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her immense shame. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Lorraine didn't say a single word. She didn't offer a lecture. She didn't say "I told you so." And she didn't remind her daughter of the deep pain she had caused. She simply stepped forward, wrapped her strong, familiar arms around both Brianna and the baby, and pulled them across the threshold into the warmth of her home. Inside, by the glowing fireplace, Brianna poured her heart out for hours. She spoke of the constant fear of being exposed, the emotional manipulation Marcus used, and the absolute blindness that pride had caused in her. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" Brianna asked, looking down at her hands. "After what I said to you? After what I let him say to you?" Quote. Lorraine reached over, gently taking her daughter's chin and lifting her head until their eyes met. "Forgiveness was never the question. Brianna, you are my daughter. But you had to learn that you can't build a real life on a foundation of smoke and mirrors. True wealth isn't what you show the world. It's who stands by you when the world turns its back." 3 months later, the lakeside house was filled with the rich, comforting aroma of hickory smoke and seasoned brisket. It was the first true family barbecue of the summer. Soul music played softly from the patio speakers, and the sound of laughter drifted over the water. Brianna stood by the grill, wearing a simple linen dress, a genuine, relaxed smile finally gracing her face. She looked over at the porch swing, where Lorraine sat in the golden afternoon light. Brianna walked over, carefully lifting her now 6-month-old son, and placed him gently into Lorraine's arms. For the first time since his birth, Lorraine held her grandson. The baby looked up, his big brown eyes blinking in the sunlight, and reached out his tiny, soft hand, wrapping his fingers around Lorraine's silver necklace. He let out a bright, gurgling laugh and pressed his face against her cheek. Lorraine closed her eyes, kissing the top of his head, a single, peaceful tear escaping down her cheek. The emotional debt of the past year was paid in full. Brianna watched them, wiping her own eyes with a soft smile. You deserve this more than anyone. Mom, thank you for not giving up on us. Never, Lorraine whispered, rocking the child. The illusion was entirely gone, replaced by something far more valuable. A truth that had healed them, a love that had saved them, and a family that could never be broken again.